Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to the minigame podcast. Today is Monday, June 2nd. Starting later than I really would like to have. Again, my macros are just taking a really long time. I've gone in there and hopefully optimized it a little bit for next time, but it's still creating this weird situation certainly where the bulk of every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, during the time where I have finally gotten my sleep schedule somewhat consistent and I am actually awake during the times of, say, noon to 8 in the evening, a lot of that is getting taken up with the macro running on my computer, which means I can't do anything on my computer, which means I have to struggle to find something else to do. Which I have other things to do certainly, but they aren't really the things I'd love to do, and they often are very physical, so you're inherently cooking and or exerting myself, so in that there's just a real hassle certainly that can happen there, as far as how all that goes. We're going to just try and rush today. I think the macro opened up everything except for the news, which I made a decent amount of progress as far as my follow list cleanup. So I may be like completely done with my follow list in the sense that I may get every single game off of it, well, what was 8,000, fairly quickly by the end of this week even, just by putting a lot of focus on it. And then it's going to be a question as far as what goes back on the follow list, because some of that is some of the games that I might actually want to buy are going to my wish list, but maybe I don't want to really buy them, and a lot of the games are going to my pre-programmed check mark, which allows for potentially infinite number of things to be just check marked. I hope. We will see. At some point, maybe Firefox will just collapse under the heels of having 8,000 plus local storage cookies set, and we may very well find out that the check marks are just not really scalable or manageable when I want to go back and start looking at things on the check marks. And certainly transferring the local storage cookies to a new computer, whenever I get around to that, is going to be a hassle, certainly too. On top of that, I am still gonna quickly say yes, I'm playing Pokemon TCG Pocket, yes, I'm still playing Memento Mori, yes, I'm still playing Maho Magica, or whatever, Madoka Magica, whatever the game is actually called, which that has actually new content in it, so that is actually taking more time than it normally would out of my day. I'm still watching Ranma 1/2 as on Hulu streaming, and frankly I'm not actually going to even get season 1 of it on Blu-ray until like the 21st. So these Blu-rays were on sale certainly, but they got back ordered very quickly. But yeah, maybe there's a tariff fear around that too. Certainly Blu-rays aren't being pressed and made inside of the United States, and honestly I guess that's probably a factor you could have in the United States and develop one, but it still would take years. Just years to get financing, years to find a location, years to build up a factory. But yeah, still trying to clean, still trying to declutter, still trying to do everything possible. It has occurred to me that some of the curation that I have programmed into my macros might run faster if I just add it to the JavaScript of a Steam page, where the Steam page itself checks to see if it's tagged with like sexual content, and then will automatically close itself, which might be something that it can do with JavaScript. Although I wouldn't be surprised if Firefox just tells it, no, you can't just close your own window whenever you want. Let's see. What else? I finished playing this game, Runaway, a road adventure, which these screenshots are incredibly deceptive in that the actual point and click aspect of the game is absolutely awful. I had to play 70-80% of the game using a walkthrough. None of it made any sense at all. And the clicking of objects were incredibly infuriating because they were very often tiny pixely objects you had to find, or they were objects that you would have to click on once in one chapter, then go back and click on a second time in another chapter, or even in the beginning there's an object you have to click on twice in the same chapter to get different objects. By the way, this screenshot isn't even accurate because there's supposed to be a medicine bag here and there just isn't. It seems like they were all over the place in this early 2000s 3D CGI attempt at animation, and it feels like there's 5 different animators, but the credits certainly don't say that there were 5 different animators. It just feels like they did not have either the time to render everything the same way or did not know what they were doing. And honestly, this felt like a game that really should have been just a movie or TV show like Tripping the Rift. Had this been on the Sci-Fi Channel after Tripping the Rift, the visuals would match very well. Of course, the game itself would have still been pretty bad, and the story would have been pretty bad. You play as this character here named George, and this female character, Gina, is a damsel in distress, which you barely see in the game, and you are given really no reason to like her at all throughout the course of the game. This nun outfit that she's wearing happens in the final cutscene at the end of the game, or one of the final cutscenes, which is another major problem with the game, in that there are easily 20, 25, 30-minute stretches in which people are just talking to you, and it is just cutscene after cutscene, or monologue after monologue then cutscene, things like that. And it puts me in this weird position in that these games weirdly are reviewed fairly high, except for this one, which is reviewed mixed. Everything else is mostly positive, and I can't help but think that it's just because of very low standards for the fact that the game usually is on sale for like 74 cents. Because yeah, and these are kind of older games, so maybe there was a reason why there would have been less competition. But as far as I can tell, Runaway, a road adventure may be a sequel to Runaway, a Dream Turtle. No, the other way around. It may be the first game in a series, and Runaway, the Dream of the Turtle might be a sequel. But I know for a fact that Runaway, A Twist of Fate is supposed to be some kind of spiritual sequel, at least, of a road adventure, in that the main character's name is George and the main female character's name is Gina, but neither of those characters look like anything close to the George and Gina that are in the first game. So yeah, you can see I've spent a whopping less than $5, $3.70 probably to own this, $3. And after having such an awful time with the first game, I kind of wonder if I'm just never gonna bother to come back and play any of these other games, which is always a sucky thing to be doing, but I just have no reason to want to destroy my love of point and clicks by playing 5 awful point and clicks after the first one was bad. And it was bad, way worse than the first Blackwell game. Like, I thought Blackwell was bad. In contrast, Blackwell is brought up to average. I've also been meaning to show this off. Cyan Worlds, several weeks ago, retweeted this image. This is a fan image of how all the different worlds in the linking books in the Myth series connect, which look at just the incredible craziness and complexity here of how things just interconnect. And clearly some of these just branch off and then loop back onto each other. And let's see if we can, they only show really show a small section here. And I wouldn't even know what really all of this is. But I would guess these are individual scenes as far as how Myst was programmed. So you'd click in one location and then it would go to another location and it would go to another location. So this isn't more of a, this is more of how the actual game programming would interconnect, I suspect, more than it is actually how the story would connect, because nobody would write a story this complicated, and that would be insane. Of course, the story in Runaway Road Adventure was absolute garbage. I know the new version of this is out, so we do now have the May numbers, and so we can see what has changed. It seems for Pokemon TCG Pocket, and I'll point out the ones I'm playing, they have estimated another $3 million in profits, which Pokemon has had some new content over the last month, so that does make some sense. And certainly it is a newer game, so it would make a lot of sense. Goddess of Victory Nikkei from Shift Up has broken into the top 10 estimate, going from 10 million to 23,450,000 estimated, and there will be more news from Shift Up later in the game too. Zenless Zone Zero and Battle Cats falling downward. I don't play those games though. And then let's see. Magica Modica, Magi, etc. has apparently dropped 15 spots and only gotten $5,600,000 estimated, which is fairly believable. It was very easy, even free to play, to max out that game. I just don't see any real push or any real reason why you would spend money in the game. And as a gacha game, it's not getting money, therefore it's not likely going to survive for that long, and inherently, yeah, that's going to be its downfall. It's also extremely limited since it's based on an anime as far as how much new content can they really throw into it, how many new characters, how many new stories. It seems like so far they've added exactly one new story with one, maybe two new characters, and I think everything else in the game has just been recapping things that have been released previously. Although in fairness, for me and probably a lot of people, there may be a lot of manga side stories and things like that that either never came to the West or people just didn't see. Also, it's 10 years ago, so a little bit of a refresh wouldn't be terrible. I need to really find this next week as I'm cleaning up my follow list, which is my focus right now. I need to find a way to not immediately get pushed to make more footage, but that almost certainly is not going to happen, because if I'm sitting around and I want to play something and make footage, I am just going to play something. Like, I'm not going to hold myself back and just be miserable, because I've never been in a situation where that has led to anything other than me making myself miserable. It doesn't motivate me in any way to go and do something different. So yeah, I probably will start playing a different game, although I need to think of a different kind of game. Like, maybe get away from the puzzle games. Definitely get away from the point and click games. Throw something else in there, something that's fairly different. And we have the Steam hardware stuff. Looks like it's been updated. And we can see NVIDIA still dominating. DirectX. What's that? I don't think too much really has changed. AMD is still being beat by Intel CPUs. Yeah. Frankly, I need one of my news sources to really point out if there's been any major changes. Let's see, Windows 11 is up almost 0.5%. The amount of people who have 16 gigabytes of RAM has gone down, but it's still the standard. So one would assume that we're seeing more computers with more than 16 gigabytes of RAM. Same. It's probably true for the speeds and the cores, is that newer computers are being bought to some extent. I doubt people are having their new computers broken and being replaced with older computers that would still run and install Steam. 1080p is higher though, so that probably is from people coming up from 720 or lower. And then the amount of storage, as far as free hard drive space, is going down in this range, which again probably means, like, none of this is actually helpful information. Is that we need to see what the contrast is, don't we? We need to click on all of this. Linux is up almost 0.5%. Windows overall is down more than Linux is up. GB is down almost a percentage, and everything above 16 GB is up. Yeah, this range is down, and everything here is going up a little bit at 3.7 gigahertz or above, but actually that does not really account for how much these numbers are down. So it almost seems like people's CPUs are getting replaced with slower computers. Interesting. 6 CPUs is down, 8 CPUs is up, 12 CPUs is up, 16 CPUs is up. Everything else is either at 0%, which is probably skewing some metrics, but then like 5, 4, 3, 2, and everything except for one CPU is also going up. VRAM for 8 gigabytes of VRAM is down, with a slight increase in 10, a big increase in 12, a big increase in 16. So that seems like more often than not people are getting new graphics cards. 1080p is up, and some of the higher resolutions are actually down, but then you're getting some bumps at very specific resolutions. Kind of doesn't matter about multi-monitor resolutions. I don't know why Steam is even really tracking that. English games are up, which perhaps is a good thing. But yeah, you can pretty much attribute almost 100% of English games going up by a significant reduction in simplified Chinese language games being released on Steam. Which, in fairness, I really haven't seen a lot of good Chinese games. Like, I've always hoped that at some point Chinese game companies could make good games, but I've always seen them to be fairly lackluster and usually heavily constrained by their government. Also seeing a big drop in Russian language games, or at least a small drop in Russian games. Are we seeing any big bumps that would be surprising otherwise? No, not really. Free hard drive space is down for a lot of things, but once you start getting over 750 gigabytes, it starts to go up. Which, yeah, I assume people are just getting bigger hard drives, which total hard drive space above 1 terabyte doesn't really correlate with that thought, because free hard drive space is actually going down. And maybe some of that is the Steam Deck. Like if you're getting a Steam Deck with 256 or 512 gigabytes, then you'd be in these two sections. And if you're getting the 64 gigabytes, you'd be in this section, although that would be crazy. Really don't care about the changes in VR. There's a long list of VR headsets, way more than I thought would be tracked. And then the other settings here are far too technical, although weirdly it does seem to indicate that a lot of these special instruction sets for CPUs like hyperthreading or SSE 4.1 seem to be going away in favor of perhaps more standard things that are a little bit nicer. I saw a video, speaking of technical things, that said that you don't actually get the full speed of some RAM if you populate all 4 slots, and that you can only really pair 2 DDR4 RAM sticks to get the max speed of the overclocking that is happening there. And maybe that is what's going on with my computer. If I pulled out 2 sticks of RAM, somehow could do that, then put something else on it that really wouldn't suffer too much by losing half of its RAM. That might be a thought, but then I just have 2 extra sticks of RAM. For my usages, I don't think there's a single scenario where that really makes sense. But yeah, my suggestion, and I think most people's suggestion, would be, if you're building a new computer, see if you can get a 64 gigabyte kit of DDR5 that are taking up 2 sticks of a motherboard that has 4 slots. And then you have room for expansion, although you probably won't ever expand in the first place. I don't think too many motherboards only have 2 slots, and I don't think too many motherboards have more than 4 slots. Of course, there is that new standard that, if it actually becomes a standard, would be very intriguing as far as changing how RAM is assembled and put on a motherboard. And there really is a room for improvement there. The RAM slots, as they are now, are very old technology. I was thinking about like rechargeable batteries, and we really need a new standard there where instead of having AAA, quadruple A, AA type batteries, we probably should just have devices that accept more of a square battery, would be my guess, although it's more difficult to make a square battery than a round battery. But most devices we have are square in some way, or at least rectangular. And the only reason we had round batteries is because flashlights were made out of piped materials and pipes, so the batteries were going inside of a rounded piece of plastic or a rounded piece of metal, and then they were being held in your hand like a flashlight. But batteries aren't used in flashlights predominantly anymore, so a square battery like we see inside of every cell phone and every Steam Deck and every other thing that has a battery in it would make a lot of sense. It's how most batteries that are rechargeable are made. And then from that, I think a new standard where the battery just comes into direct contact with a circuit board and has several different contacts to transfer power and sense temperature and sense its charging state, and just send all of that information as cheap as possible so that the battery is not having to have all of that built in as far as battery monitoring. And really there might be room for improvement where batteries in devices would be held in by a kind of safety latch, that as soon as a battery started to expand or heat up, it would actively just eject it from it. So you would have your Steam Deck or Game Boy equivalent, and there would be a battery pack in it, and there would be, say, a pressure switch directly on top of the battery, snapped into the plastic enclosure shell of it. And if it started to expand, if it started to get too hot, even, I don't know how it would eject itself if it was too hot, but there's probably a bimetallic element you could do there, like a circuit breaker, to make it bend, and the back would just pop off and the battery would shoot out, immediately disconnecting the battery, immediately putting a battery on the ground, maybe spreading a fire, but perhaps making it more obvious too. There is also room certainly for standards as far as just requiring a certain level of water resistance, water tightness in every single device, so that there would just be an O-ring on every enclosure. But unfortunately, what we have right now, and I know this probably doesn't matter to most people, is we have a lot of built-in battery devices that are just becoming e-waste. And yeah, nobody really wants that, but also nobody wants to take apart a $5 device to put in a new rechargeable battery. Without changing anything, you could just mandate that all devices have a removable piece of plastic slot in which their battery is attached, and you just screw and unscrew that slot, and inside that slot you just have to take a pair of tweezers and plug it into a what they call JST connector, which, if they could even agree on which side is the positive and which side is the negative on those connectors by some kind of European Union mandate, that would be great. But yeah, that was something I was thinking about, which shows I have too much time on my hand. Didn't work on my chart, so it's still slightly off. And yeah, I'm still definitely down on this chart and just don't think it's showing me anything informative. It is incredibly informative, I will say, though, to say how many games I have seen on Steam that are released before 2025. So I'm just basically very quickly eliminating anything that doesn't have 30 reviews and came out before January 1st, 2025. And there's just a massive amount of games that have been removed in one or two different ways. There's several different ways they can be removed from Steam. But yeah, a lot of them have been removed. A lot of them are irrelevant in the sense that they don't have 30 reviews. A lot of them do have 30 reviews, or at least a few reviews, and are mixed reviewed, which is going to make them fairly useless and not worth playing. There's a few games that are like, there's like a Barbie game, and you'd think the Barbie game would be relevant, but it really isn't. It just doesn't have those reviews at all. So I've been just burning through it over the weekend, and you can tell that. I was at 7,000 last time I streamed, I now have, according to this, 3,516 games on my fall list. I'm also getting rid of all of the adult games. For the most part, there might be one or two that actually has some reason why I might keep it, but almost all the adult games, even the ones that were rated reviewed well, are still just adult games and not YouTube family friendly, obviously, and so there's just no reason for me to really own them and try and cover them in some way. Maybe in some distant future I'll find some other service I can do where I could do some kind of like Patreon only, members only type stream and cover adult games. I don't know how many of them would have even really needed to be done, but certainly I'm burning through this fast enough. I probably have misclicked a small number, maybe 20 or 30 games may have been lost, but if they're big enough I'll find them again, and if I get desperate enough to find new games I'll just start looking through like every single category on Steam overall, and see the fall list down to 3,500 is really pinning down an ambition down to much closer realistic levels as far as the number of games I have. I haven't certainly not played 1,800 games already, but yeah, for the rest of my life, if I really needed to buy 3,500 more games, I would probably be set for life. I just wouldn't have any more time. Runaway Road Adventure, because I left it running, says it was run for 103 hours. It doesn't have any achievements at all, and so that's the only game I played. But yeah, it is now just going to be the rest of this week to get this fall list cleaned up and done with and actually accomplish something I can be proud of, and then the big question is just to think about what should go back on the fall list, because if nothing's on the fall list, then the news sections aren't going to generate any news for me, so I would be underusing that new news feature that Steam has that I didn't even know Steam had until a few weeks ago. So yeah, and more than likely I will have to do a wishlist cleanup and put a lot of games that I moved to the wishlist back on the fall list if I'm not actually interested in buying them. But I probably should just at this point remove them completely if that's going to be the case. And as far as VR games, they're getting the VR checkbox, and I probably won't ever deal with the VR games at all. High chance I'll never have a VR headset and never care about that at all. So the VR checkbox games are really just a short list, relatively speaking, of games that you might get if you happen to have VR. But now that the default list is down to 3,516, there is also a very high chance that this page will just always load. It will no longer crash, and yeah, even at like 5,000 it was seemingly loading fine. So it's just once you get to like 7,000 and 8,000 that it starts to take too long for their servers to always load the page. A lot of that has to do with it being dynamically generated. We aren't really at a point where there's anything super new. This Outbreak Storm Chaser might be an interesting game. Stellar Blade obviously is available for pre-purchase. Yeah, I'm not really hearing a lot of people still talking about Oblivion. I can't help but feel like Oblivion Remastered really was there for the fans of Oblivion only. Apparently they're doing a couple publisher type sales, and this is still taking longer than it really should do this. You know, getting Deadly Premonition 2, which is a bad game, for $1.99. This is probably not a terrible thought, but I'm also still not really in the best place to just be wasting extra money. Just ordered a new Tuya heavy duty power outlet for my microwave that supposedly does 25 amps, but you have to really hope and pray that the outlets actually do that and that they don't just melt the plastic around them or short out, because a lot of those devices really are designed to only last at 10 amps. I had found out that there's an overcharge feature, which is a terrible name, on the power monitoring outlet that I have on my countertop toaster oven, convection oven. And what overcharge it does is crazy they describe that as overcharge anyways, because what overcharge to me would mean is that you are actively putting more volts somehow into the circuit, which there's no way you would do that in a safe fashion. You would have to find a different plug that was on a different leg of your circuit breaker. So there's like usually a leg and a B leg in a residential wiring, and the only devices that typically use the A and B leg in conjunction are things like electric dryers and maybe car chargers, and it bumps everything up to 200 volts instead 240 volts instead of 120, and that would be overcharging a 120 circuit, is to put more voltage in it, in my mind. But that's not what the feature is at all. It's just terribly translated from Chinese, I'm sure. What the overcharge feature actually is it just checks to see if your device has been using more than 3 watts, and if it hasn't been using more than 3 watts for like 3 hours, it just turns off the circuit. So if you had, say, just a light bulb or something that liked to run and people left it on all the time, you could use it for something like that. So I turned that on as a feature, trying to see, well, clearly when my convection oven is blinking a light, it's not using more than 3 watts per hour. That would be insane. Well, as far as I can tell, it is using not 3 watts per hour to make a blinking light, but actually 10 watts per hour. So effectively, in 24 hours, you are running the equivalent of a 240 bulb of power when it's just sitting there doing nothing. So I put in some new programming that I'll have to test out as far as telling it to turn off my convection oven. Now it's in my kitchen, so the light switch is already a smart thing, so when the light switches come on, it will turn on the oven. The reason why I want to now test to see how much power my microwave is wasting, because it too might be wasting all that things. Now 10 watts per hour would be nothing if you have a whole bunch of traditional light bulbs, and so if you're running a 60 watt light bulb and just leaving it on every hour, that would be your first focus, certainly. But most people turn off light bulbs, particularly with all my smart ways in which lights come on and off, and most people have LED bulbs, which are usually somewhere closer to 10 to maybe 30 watts at most if you have a really big LED array. So we've minimized over the past couple of decades the amount of power being used by light bulbs, and so now it is thinking more as far as other devices. What can you turn off and save a little bit of electricity? None of it's going to help you too much, but the Tuya app estimates that today alone I spent $3 in electricity on just light bulbs and the oven and things it can monitor, which is not including the big ticket items like my refrigerator, which is constantly running and you can't do anything about that, and my air conditioner, which is fairly consistently running, although I am making tweaks there too to try and get it to run a little bit less. My ceiling fan is probably using a decent amount of power, but then it would be way uncomfortable if I didn't have my ceiling fan on. And it's better to have a ceiling fan on if a person is in the room than it is to have the air conditioner running. But yeah, I doubt my washer or dryer is using much electricity when idle, although in fairness my dryer may actually be using a decent amount of energy because the dryer is more modern and electric, whereas my washer is very much not modern. So yeah, Deadly Premonition 2 is mostly positive. Do I own Deadly Premonition 1? Yes, so I could get the bundle here. So I'll keep that in mind. Drag that tab over here and we might as well go through Yu-Gi-Oh! While we're doing that. But yeah, short of turning my computer off, which I never do, I'm going to quickly run out of things that I could really control to save a few bucks. But I'd like it to be as efficient as possible, more on principle than anything else. And I'm really not super eco-friendly. Like, the way recycling is done in the United States never really impressed me much, and I just yesterday saw a video of someone kind of breaking it down in the UK and how it works, and a lot of how the UK does it is not too different from how it's done in the United States, and they kind of turned me around on it. Like, I definitely came into that video with a bad attitude towards recycling, and I still realize that there is a lot of reasons to have a bad attitude towards recycling, but it does actually help to try and recycle. Of course, the main thing that was mentioned in the video is that there's just a lot of lacking legislation, even though some legislation is going into effect in the UK, that around the world there's a lack of real legislation forcing manufacturers of plastic products in particular to be more transparent and talk about the recyclability of those products, or to perhaps stop incentivizing the oil industry to make plastic products, which would inherently rebalance the whole situation. Is if all of a sudden it was more expensive to make things in plastic, you'd see a lot more things made in other styles of materials. In a lot of ways, I think though we should probably go back to a lot more glass bottles, a lot more wooden crates. There is bigger understanding modern times around carbon offsets and the interest in reducing carbon offsets nowadays, where in the past a lot of recycling was only about the amount of landfill material that was being produced. I don't know who made the video or anything like that, but yeah, it definitely was an example of being more brought into the conversation and told some information which I assume is mostly correct, that I all of a sudden felt more generous. But yeah, I definitely still have the bad attitude that a lot of recycling is pushed onto the end consumer products, who have no choice in most cases as far as what style of packaging is around the products they need to buy to live. And there is this implication that if an end consumer recycles products, that is actually going to help when you have so many other people, corporations and such, just making massive amounts of trash in the factories and production lines and things like that. Sticky business is overwhelmingly positive. Cozy small business. I'm a little afraid to play any game that's labeled as cozy these days. But yeah. There was a lot in the video too that was, let me see if I can just look it up while I'm talking about it so I can give proper credit, about how recycling is really the least important factor, and it is the reduce and reusing factor that is way more important for almost every person. But yeah, I can buy into that a lot. Reduce the usage of things and reusing things, so you're not buying more stuff. I know the title of the video was "Does Recycling Really Work?" So it definitely clickbaited me. Yes, it is. It's a title is "Does Recycling Even Do Anything?" ? Simon Clark is the producer. 35 minutes and 50 seconds. So I would say, yeah, don't hyper focus on the fact that he's talking about the UK, and that in other countries that you might be in, there might be a completely different scenario. But there is, I think, a lot to learn there. And perhaps relearn, or at least reevaluate. But inherently there is still a lot of countries and cities and counties that want to just fine people for not recycling and are just trying to make a revenue source out of it. So they are picking up the recycling from your house, and then they are taking all the scrap metal out of it and the things that are easiest to recycle and resell and make a profit on, and then they are throwing the rest of it into the trash. Plastic in particular is mostly burnt off. There's just no way you're going to really recycle plastic. The fibers in paper cannot be infinitely recycled. As you chop up the paper, the fibers get smaller and smaller. At some point it becomes impossible to make 100% recycled paper that way, and so you have to throw in new paper pulp to make the recycled parts stick together and work. It's a shame we don't have the Star Trek replicator technology, which just breaks everything down, or at least we assume that's what it did. And you can see here, even though I'm going through all my fall list, there's a massive amount of games still on my wish list, so getting rid of 3,000 plus games on my fall list really does not touch upon the hoarding mentality too much of all the games I would like to own and would like to cover. This sale has an actual Steam Deck section, although a lot of it does seem like it is just fairly redundant stuff, which is probably always going to be the case around Steam Deck. I also found out, as we're still warming up, I didn't say, by the way, we were going to warm up for about an hour, but we are doing that. Here I can just go ahead and add that to my account, which more and more that is what I want to do. Although this may very well not be a game that I ever actually would get around to playing. Certainly a great way to promote your sequel is to give away your original game, although your original game isn't really old enough to justify being given away for too long. And this looks like an early access game. Storm chasing hasn't really been touched upon as a video game, and I'm not sure we're really seeing a video game here in this case either. Yeah. Anyways, I've also been working on my Discord, which is still kind of in hiding mode, in that I don't think I really have any links to it posted anywhere. So I'm just transferring a lot of my content. No refurb Steam Decks today, it seems. Well, let's reload and just see if that changes. I don't believe the Steam Deck I've ordered has shipped out yet, and frankly, I may very well have ordered it at perhaps a very weird time, or maybe the best time, in that it may ship out just as the Switch 2 is released, and depending on the availability and the ease of getting a Switch 2 may drastically affect whether having a refurb Steam Deck makes any sense or not. Although if you can get both still. Steam Deck is a great way to get into PC gaming without having to have a full PC, and it's the only real way that I would suggest to get into handheld PC gaming. And then a Switch 2 can be for your Nintendo games and your Mario Kart, which will probably be the only day one game worth playing. Anyways, I was talking about my Discord. Apparently the slickdeals.net has its own app and its own email alert system, and it doesn't really want you to be able to scrape specific information from specific categories. It has 3 RSS feeds for like the front page, but if you want specifically just board games, even though there's a category for that, there isn't an RSS feed. If you want specifically just video games, on my Discord there's video games, there's no RSS feed for that. So then you need some kind of middleware software that's going to be some kind of online app, more than likely, to convert HTML web pages into an RSS feed. And I had one that was doing that for 14 days. And then without really alerting me or anything, it told me my 14-day trial was over, which I didn't know it was a trial. I wouldn't have even bothered with it had I known it was a trial. So I had to go and use a different service and find a different service to convert Slick Deals video games feeds to an RSS feed. Why do I have to convert it to an RSS feed for Discord? Because then there's a bot called Monitor RSS that will post posts that are RSS feeds to Discord. In that, I would like, if there was a free service, for there to be a way to have an email address that anything getting emailed to that email address would automatically become a Discord post. And it looks like there is a software that will do that, but it's pay, so I'm not willing to engage with anything that's going to cost me money, as my YouTube channel and my Discord for sure is not making me any money. But yeah, there was also a bot I saw that might do forums via Discord, which might be an interesting way to do things too. I really would like to see Discord be the one ring that rules them all, but there's equal chances that I set up my Discord and then Discord itself just changes how its service works, starts trying to charge people, or goes out of business completely. But yeah, and that's where modern times a more federated service would make a lot more sense. And if I ever get around to setting up my like Nextcloud service, maybe Nextcloud would be an option, but probably not. But there probably is some kind of home server equivalent to Discord one could run. But yeah, it is still kind of crazy that so many people have emails and are a lot of times only using them to sign up for services or to get spam and reset passwords, and yet there's no new service that quite works for everybody. At one point it looked like that might have been Facebook early on. At one point it looked like that might have been Twitter, but noticeably Facebook and Twitter haven't added all the features people would like. Yeah, I don't think federated services like Blue Sky have had any level of success, if you would say Blue Sky even is a federated service. Apparently this Hitman game was free for like 1 day and I missed it, so I'm kind of kicking myself for that. But yeah, I suppose that is a long rambly way of saying I fixed my RSS feed on my Discord for the deals channel, giving me deals. Definitely notifications from my YouTube channel are only really coming out through my Discord. I have all of the bells clicked to give me all notifications on my public YouTube channel, the one you're watching right now, on my personal account, and I definitely am not seeing notifications from every YouTube short that's coming out. No way. So yeah, YouTube's own app refuses to put out notifications, which sucks for those people who really want all those notifications. Now, I don't know how many people do want those notifications, and come to think of it, I probably should break the notifications up into at least 3 different categories, where the YouTube shorts, pre-recorded footage, and live streams are all separate channels, which you can mute or unmute for notifications. But yeah, I'll have to experiment and see if I can pull that off. Anyway, that's enough warm-up. It's been about an hour. We're going to try and go through the Video Games Chronicle articles, but also it is just going to be wild, and I think there will be tabs all over the place still, and so I'm not expecting perfection today. Didn't really work on my macros at all. So there's a game that came out on Steam here, and we'll just leave it at that. I'll make a YouTube short on that. IO Interactive announces the first showcase featuring Hitman 007 First Light and Mind's Eye. Okay. So they're going to make an announcement for an announcement, basically. We have another game here. Does this have a chance of being good? I don't think so. IO Interactive's Bond game is called 007 First Light, with a reveal set this week. Well, this hair seems wrong for James Bond, I would say. And I'm no James Bond expert, but I would suspect this is not the right gun for James Bond. This stance in this trench coat doesn't feel James Bond like. So maybe this isn't supposed to be James Bond and this is another character. And I have wonder if James Bond isn't left-handed. Yeah, nothing here screams James Bond by any means. Nothing in the design or anything like that. Don't forget the bear. Looks like a simplistic match game, which I don't think I need to make a YouTube short around that. The Star Wars Jedi director's new studio is making a Dungeons & Dragons action-adventure game. It's called Estig Amusins. Is that his name? Stig Amusins? Giant Skull has teamed up with Wizards of the Coast. I guess his name is Stig. Feels like that's probably not his real first name. Apparently in the UK, Stig is like the freshman. It's a freshman term used in some of the schools in the UK, and that's why they called the racer in Top Gear the Stig, is that he was just the new guy. Apparently, yeah, that's what I've heard at least. There's a big issue certainly with Dungeons and Dragons at the moment, that it seems like it's probably Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro as a parent company are just going to embrace a lot of AI generated slop in their own creations, and they probably are going to allow licensing to happen like crazy. And we've seen that succeed well with Baldur's Gate so far, but I can't help but suspect we're going to see oversaturation occur very quickly and just a lowering of quality very quickly. Secthouse does not look like anything of interest. The Summer Games Fest schedule, your complete 2025 guide, all the dates and live stream times for every Summer Games Fest presentation. Every year I wonder about watching these presentations, and yeah, I guess if I have my computer just running doing something else I might watch them, but there's really never anything of importance. This accessibility showcase might be interesting, but a lot of these other ones, like the Day of the Devs or the Devolver Direct, have very little to say and just don't need to be watched in real time. Everything that is important will be mentioned by a mainstream game news source instead, and people will be talking about it. Suppose if you're a content creator and you've got nothing better to do, watching the Summer Games Fest and talking over it might make some sense, but I'm not sure how many people even really like that. I think you probably need a pretty established audience and decent personality to even do that. It'll be interesting to see where the remnants of Giant Bomb do that, if they do that at all, as the remnants of Giant Bomb have not really established themselves. I don't think they've established a YouTube channel. I don't think they own the Giant Bomb website, so they probably don't even have the podcast streams and their RSS feeds that serve the podcast MP3 audios. Which, by the way, I kind of knew it, but I hadn't looked at it in a while. But you can, if you are making an old audio podcast first. I don't know how well this really works for YouTube, but I don't see a lot of people doing it. But yeah, if you started a podcast in the old days, if you've got a lot of audience listening to a podcast, if you've just got this legacy audience that does not want to really watch video or watch or listen to things on YouTube, inherently you would still want to push them to YouTube so you could run better ads and get more ad revenue, assuming YouTube is better ad revenue. But yeah, if you have all of that, you can just automatically have YouTube ingest the RSS feed of your podcast, your audio podcast, and automatically make episodes, which, yeah, then whatever you're going to do with the video footage, if you're recording video footage of a podcast, would then just be clips later and might get people to watch it a second time. And I definitely see a lot of people do that, although what they do is they go live on YouTube and do a video podcast in its totality, and then they release clips over the course of a week or two later of the exact same footage. And that seems to work very well for people. If you were new and you didn't have a legacy audience of an audio podcast, there really is no reason to have an audio podcast, in my opinion. But I could be wrong. You might have some kind of contract or deal that's getting you good ad revenue. But if you're paying to stream via an audio podcast on a different service than YouTube, or if it's not getting you any income, it makes all the sense in the world to stop that and move people to YouTube and just say, we need you to potentially either be a YouTube premium member and give us ad revenue that way, or watch ads. And yeah, most people that are new are going to go live and do a video podcast, which is really what people think of as podcasts nowadays, first on YouTube. You might even do it on something like Twitch, but you probably aren't just doing it the old way, which inherently highlights how the RSS podcast collector that I use, which is so out of date that you have to hack Android to even install it, is losing its value in a lot of places. But it won't work perfectly for me to get rid of it, because the thought and the hope would have been that I could put RSS feeds on an infinite number of channels on my Discord, and even have some private channels. Monitor RSS only lets you do 10 RSS feeds, so I have way more than that. So again, trying to move everything to Discord if I could, the feature's just not there. There's even a feature, speaking of features, on Discord that integrates videos that are members only to your Discord channel, kind of like a Patreon thing. But you have to already be monetized to even look at the features and try and do it. And there's nothing else that is actually integrated with Discord, which, if they have that much connected to YouTube already, why not have more connections instead of me having to use bots? Moving on, a Slovenian retailer fills their car with Switch 2 consoles for pre-launch road trip. With no official distribution in Slovenia, Konzolko hit the road. Interesting. I saw this picture, but I didn't get the actual story behind it, and so I think people just took this picture and made a bunch of live fake memes with it. As far as somebody was hoarding Switch 2s, seems like there's something different happening here. Is it safe to show the barcodes on top of the Switch 2s? It may not be. That may be something where anybody who could zoom in and enhance, and I won't do it here, but anyone that could do that on the image maybe can make a claim of some sort that their Switch 2 was stolen, or that it was damaged, or that they own it. I don't know what kind of scams you could really pull off there. Yeah, the hole in the box showing a unique serial code for electronic devices really shows the level of tracking that is happening on products these days, and how you don't really have an opportunity to say, no, I don't want to be in some database somewhere as far as my products that I purchase. This game doesn't look like anything. Let's see, the Street Fighter 2 composer Yoko Shimomura has created a new track for Street Fighter 6, returning to the series after 30 plus years. The new track will be added to Street Fighter 6 for free as part of the week's Elena update, or Elena update. Maybe it's probably Elena. I don't think people are super happy about Street Fighter 6 though at the moment, and I don't think there's actually a Steam link from Video Games Chronicle to Street Fighter 6. So instead we just have a random game like this as the next thing. People Can Fly has canceled 2 games, including a Square Enix project. Square Enix was noticeably canceling a lot of projects just a month ago. The Gears of War and Outriders studio looks set to make layoffs. I don't know if this is speculation on Video Games Chronicle, if they've actually said something. And I think it is weird that you would be describing People Can Fly as a Gears of War developer when they made like one Gears of War game out of 5, if I'm recalling correctly, and Outriders, which is a game I don't even recognize. I think they are still much more known for their Bulletstorm game from over a decade ago, and maybe Painkiller. Yeah. They reportedly laid off 30 developers working on an unannounced Square Enix project last January. Which, does that mean January 2025 or January 2024 when you say last? I don't even know. VR game being cancelled isn't really a big loss in my mind. I'm surprised, frankly, that People Can Fly has even succeeded as long as it has. 20-year anniversary in 2022, and was owned by Epic Games for about 3 years. It developed Painkiller, which was a huge success, Bulletstorm, which got talked about a lot, and then basically nothing for a long time. Eventually Gears of War Judgment, and then Square Enix's Outriders, which I didn't even know about that. Yeah, if there was ever a company that I would think was going to struggle to stay around, it definitely would be People Can Fly. Not only because their games haven't sold, but the style of games they're making are just increasingly outdated over the course of 20 years. And don't get me wrong, I do enjoy a dude bro style game like Bulletstorm or Gears of War every now and then, but it's just not what most people are looking for or even expecting. Maybe people are looking for it, but since people aren't demanding for it, aren't expecting it, they're not getting it. Yeah. There may just not be a big enough audience still around that, I'll make a YouTube short on this, that wants those kinds of there may just not be enough gamers around that want a dude bro game, something that would be called anti-woke in modern times. Next story from Video Games Chronicle. We tried and it didn't work out. CD Projekt Red co-founder says it shouldn't stray from AAA open world RPGs. The Witcher and Cyberpunk studios should stay razor sharp focused on what it knows best, says Marcin Iwinski. Okay. I guess I would agree with that. What did they try that wasn't that? They tried their Gwent game, card game, a couple times. Which in fairness, yeah. I really wouldn't expect the remnants of CD Projekt Red, which that's still around, to have any extra skills or special skills on making anything other than a AAA open world RPG. I barely expect them to have the skills to do that. The only thing I could possibly tweak here is that maybe they could make a AA game that was less buggy on day one, a game that wasn't quite so open world, and a game that wasn't particularly so RPG-ish, which in fairness Witcher 3 wasn't even that RPG-ish in the first place. So you could water down each of those elements to make a AA game that might be slightly better and easier to make, demand less profits overall. We have what looks like a text-only game. There's a decent amount of games on Steam that either look like they barely support English or straight up say they don't support English. A lot of those on my follow list. Easy to get rid of those. Sega Football Club Champions is now a free-to-play game powered by Football Manager in the latest installment of Sega's long-running Japan-only series, Sakatsuku. I was watching Clarkson's Farm on Prime Video and it jumped over to a rugby match after I'd watched the latest episode, and boy were there a lot of people on the field. I thought rugby teams were like 2 teams of 8, but that definitely did not feel like there was 16 people on the field. It felt like it was closer to 25. I don't know, maybe this was a bunch of referees or something, but yeah, and I know soccer, football is different than rugby, but found it strange that it would just automatically play into a live match that I had never shown any interest in at all. But I guess that does show that Prime Video is probably promoting more of these European popular sports. As far as this game, we'll see it later and put it on the fall list, I imagine. There's a lot of games like this on the fall list too that are going to take more thought. As far as there's some games that show good ideas but are just completely irrelevant and may very well have been on the fall list as examples of something I would like to see made in the future, but since I have no power really to make something appear in the future, it's kind of pointless to even have them on the fall list. At that point, I'm just reminding myself of what I don't have. Let's see. Moving on, Elden Ring Night Rain sells 2 million copies in one day as a patch for easier solo play as announced. Some of these stories might be redundant, so we may find a point here where we can skip through a lot of this real quick. And yeah, there's a decent amount of the stuff that I'm just not going to bother to make even YouTube shorts on it. Death Stranding getting a live game premiere presentation during the Summer Games Fest. I think we have hit a point here where we're going to start to see. Is this some kind of defective cow thing? It looks like he has extra hind legs, but I don't think that is. Doesn't matter. It says it's a short walking simulator. It's free to play. It's kind of hard to say. I'd want to put this on the follow list, but I guess I don't have to anymore. I can just put a check mark on it and come back to it later. Yeah, it does seem very weird. I don't even know what those are supposed to be as far as vestigial extra legs or something. You see a lot of games that are kind of like this, where they feel like they are something that would have been released on the Super NES by a third-party licensor and might be good, or at least seem like they're good, but so many of them are just incredibly irrelevant, and even if they are reviewed, they're not reviewed well. Moving on, Playtronic confirms layoffs. The landscape is shifting, and with it, so must we. Yes, I think we have hit a point now where I must have manually opened all of the Video Games Chronicle articles, and now we're going through repeated ones from the last stream, which lets me speed this whole process up quite a bit, because we can now just close these without really discussing them. And if we're lucky, all of the games in between are going to be new games on Steam that are also not worth talking about. Cardboard Hero looks like something that might be interesting. There's still a decent number of games that want that Paper Mario or Cardboard feel. I'm not sure I found one that's good. And that's another thing I certainly should think about on the wishlist cleanup when I get to that point, is just do I really want to play 3 games that have the same gimmick, or do I want to just play the best game that has that gimmick? I'm not 100% sure at the moment. I'll probably be very inconsistent when doing the wishlist cleanup anyways. It'll very much come down to my own opinions and feelings at the moment. Now weirdly, this magnet cube feels like it's a ripoff of Mind Over Magnet, but looks way worse. I wonder if there is a case here where somebody could totally rip off another person's game as far as the level designs and the puzzles, and just put way worse artistry over it and try and sell it for a quick buck. I have to assume a lot of the reason why games are missing from Steam, so many are missing, is because they made a quick buck or two and then they pulled out quick. They didn't want to get extra income for the next year and have to file taxes on it, or people filed taxes and realized that making a few extra dollars is not worth their time with the extra tax filings you might have to do with that. There's still a lot of these RPG style games, whether they're made with RPG Maker or something else, and those are always a big question mark as far as the old school fantasy RPG type games. There's plenty of also JRPG games too. Far too many on my wish list than I actually would want to play. And in the past, I've just been really generous as far as what has gone on the fall list, and probably should be more strict as far as what stays there now that I've added a 3rd level of filtering. Still not 100% sure why these articles, just the name of this tells me this is a troll game. Yeah, I'm still not sure why these new games are here. Yeah, I don't think that this is actually a good game, but I'll give it a chance. So theoretically, if my macros are working, which they never seem to be, today's run should have caught it up, and Wednesday's run should fix things. Okay. So then next we have what are supposed to be Gematsu articles. So immediately the next thing we have is another game on Steam. And it looks to me like we've got quite a few games, to the point where I'm a little concerned that Gematsu articles didn't open at all, which I'm not sure why that would be the case. That one's not visually interesting enough for me. At some point, particularly games on my wish list, if they are hidden object games like that, I probably am going to reject them. Although for the most part, very few of those games made it to my wish list in the first place. And there is equally an argument that I should go back and find more hidden object games and play them, and actually try and balance out my point and click list series of games with hidden object games, and just embrace what point and clicks evolved into, for better or worse. Particularly, I would probably prefer to play a hidden object type game that is at least consistently slightly above average in quality than a point and click that is as bad as Runaway, a road trip, a road adventure, whatever it's called. Still get a lot of junk, to say the least. Alright, so here's our first Komatsu article, IO Interactive Showcase set for June 6. And I don't think there's anything too much more to talk about there. Now that the default list is approaching being emptied, having things checkboxed seems so simplistic and so easy. I may very well fall into the mistake of making way too many extra YouTube shorts, but I don't know what way too many is, really. I think it's already way past the point of way too many. And yeah, one of my shorts for the Fable remake came out and it was getting quite a lot of views. So that one is one that hit, but then probably 30 or 40 have come out since then, and none of them have gotten very many views at all, which, heck, because it's an automated process, it just doesn't really matter to me. It's all gravy, as it were. The only hope is I'm not just irritating some potential future audience, but it doesn't seem like I am. I think people in general may be irritated with YouTube Shorts, but that's about it. Now, vertical videos seems to still be a thing that people might engage with, and I guess there is a possibility that I could go vertical with this live streams, but it doesn't quite make a lot of sense to me, because inherently, if I was going to go vertical with two sources, you'd just be sitting here watching the Yu-Gi-Oh! Or maybe even have dual live play, but if dual live's playing, then the audio would have to be muted the whole time, and then I wouldn't be using it for background audio. And that'd be just kind of pointless screensaver type footage, where the top of the verticals would be here. It would kind of make a lot more sense if, let's see if we could do something like this. If the vertical video was something closer to that, which that's a thought, certainly, is that if I had my own monitor rotated to a vertical format, which would make some sense, and I had a specific monitor rotated 90 degrees, and then I was live streaming and showing web page articles, and then it would be vertical kind of like this, that might make some sense. Although most of the time you still probably wouldn't see everything anyways, and I would have to tweak just everything to get back to the size I really would want it to and the look I would really want it to have. I'm not even going to bother to cover this article, it's just a trailer for this game. We're going to get a lot of articles like that. So, in the same thought, if vertical video was like this, you would just get much further down the point. A big part of where this might come into play is going to come down to just how close I can get my monitor. I have a new monitor that I was going to put out with my new computer, but I really need it right in front of my face, and I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to get it right in front of my face and still sit in the reclining chair I sit in, which is the only thing cushioned enough for me for sitting for so long. But yeah, I really need it really close to my face, and frankly I need it on some kind of contraption that would hover over my head when in the chair and potentially hover over my head when lying in bed, which if I was lying down completely, I would probably sound way worse than I even do now, as far as just breathing goes. Let's see, the Australian classification rates classification has rated Rune Factory Guardians of Azuma for PS5 and Xbox Series and the Disgaea 7 complete. So I guess they were given some kind of classification and not refused classification and just banned. Okay. So the first link here is to Rune Factory Guardians. I don't think Disgaea 7 Complete has a Steam link from the looks of it. And this game is actually already checkmarked and not out yet. And this is a great example of how the check marks are going to work. Is that if I come back to a page because they put out a press release and Gamatsu talks about them or some other news source of mine talks about them, then I'll see the game again. If the game comes out silently and I never hear about it, then it will just be checked forever. At some point in the future, I might go through everything that was made on May or April of 2025 and just look at all the checkmark things and maybe even update the checkmarks. Although I don't really have a reason to update the checkmarks, but just to have a rolling clean out might make some sense if I can automate that and make that easy. But yeah, the thought here is the checkmarks will just stay forever. If there's a game that's going to be in early access for 4 years, it'll just be checkmarked. If after 4 years of being in early access, which there's a lot of games on Steam that are like that, where they are in early access forever, I don't know if I've seen a single one that actually came out of early access after being in early access for 4 years. But we now have certainly last update information as far as what was the latest update being posted to news and announcements, and there is a warning that is going to start popping up for games that have not been updated as far as the software in a while. It's a little weird there isn't like a version system somewhere here that you can see what version the game is now up to, and almost certainly in the back end of Steam there is a versioning system, but it may not have a good system tied in with it. Let's see, is this Apocalypse Rush something? It might be. I'm being very generous. And see, weirdly we have the link to the Steam Deck here way into the Gamatsu articles. Just doesn't make any sense why this tab would be here. Nothing has changed as far as if you absolutely want a expensive non-refurb version of the Steam Deck and can't wait for a refurb, which may be the case for a lot of people who try in the next week or so to get us to switch to and find they can't. You have the option of the LCD version for $400. You can get better battery life, a bigger screen physically, and a better screen because it's no LED for another $150, which, if you can afford it, I would recommend the 512 OLED. But if you can't, if you're also planning on buying a Switch 2, the $399 LCD may be an option, although heavily check for refurbs, certainly. I got a USB hub that does basically the same thing that this Steam Deck dock does for $8 via Slick Deals, not $80 as what is available on Steam. And I really wouldn't recommend this dock. Like, there are ones that will give you a lot more for $80, and there are ones that will give you a lot more or just about the same thing for $40 on Amazon. And you're going to only really want to pay $80 if it has a built-in NVMe slot for extra storage, which I don't think people really should get. I think you should get a $30 dock if you absolutely need a dock where it can be placed. Otherwise, get a kickstand or a case like Mechanism or something for your Steam Deck. Then just get a USB-C hub and plug in an USB hard drive, which will cost you a lot less than an NVMe stick if you need a massive amount of storage directly connected to your Steam Deck, which isn't really the solution you would want. Let's check my library's compatibility while we're here. See if that's gone up by much. Probably has gone up, but I don't remember what the number was before, and so yeah, this is showing me a lot of games, but it's not giving me any numbers. It's really what I would want to see, is a lot of numbers. A lot of these games are not games I've engaged with or played with in a long time, so if the things at the top here are the things I've most recently played, that's not really telling me what I want to know. What I want to know is the improvement. Kind of sucks Memento Mori doesn't work on the Steam Deck. It's no surprise this game doesn't work. This game barely works on Windows. Steam Deck has its own flat pack for OBS Studio, and it's kind of crazy to have OBS Studio in your Steam account. Definitely some of these though should work and would work if you're using something outside of Steam. Like these two games could definitely be played with the ScumVM engine on your Steam Deck, no problem about that. This one also. Pinball Arcade not working on a Steam Deck sucks. Certainly. And yeah, there's still a decent amount of untested games as far as how they go with that. Where it definitely feels like there should be some testing that has happened on, although none of these games really jump out as being this absolutely should have been tested. Broken Sword 3 is about the biggest game on this list outside of Indiana Jones and ScumVM games. But yeah, it's nice to see compatibility here, although it is also kind of weird for me because as a content creator I'm not going to actually play any of these games on the Steam Deck. And I guess inherently this list here is going to be a list of every single game in my account otherwise. Yeah. It's going to stop after a while. So that was kind of pointless because it's not giving me any real numbers. This might be something. IO Interactive officially announces 007 First Light has been updated. The update here is that the showcase for June 6th will feature the game. Let's see, this is a game that was, I guess, on the fall list. Now no longer needs to be in the fall list. You can see how there's still a sluggish momentum there, even with 3,000 games on my fall list. And weirdly, there might be 1,000 games that I'm going to have to use a different method to remove from my fall list because they've been completely removed from Steam. So clicking on the link will just take me to the front page of Steam. But yeah, a lot of games are like this, where they come out in early access and then 2 weeks later they are at their full release, which I'll take that any day over games that are in early access for years upon years and just never get a final release, or they get a pathetic final release that is completely just lackluster and unsatisfactory. Hyperdimension Neptunia Rebirth 2 Sisters Generation for Switch launches this summer in Asia with English language support. The Neptunia game with the doggos and the motorcycles is actually weirdly highly reviewed, which I had heard it was a pretty bad game, so I'm starting to potentially distrust reviews a little bit more than I can afford to, because if I actively just start distrusting reviews, then I have nothing to go by at all as far as games. I could try and find people who've reviewed those games, but I mean, content creators who've reviewed it or news sites who've reviewed it, but that tends to be worse than just believing people who actually can prove they paid for the game via Steam. Tabletop figurines turn-based strategy game Table Tactics has been announced for PS4 and 5, Xbox One and Series, Switch and PC. Okay. And here we can see it here. Yeah. I see a lot of visual style in this that might help the game be good, but I really would need to see how it actually played to get a better idea. Certainly. I'm definitely not going to care about clickers. Definitely not going to care about things that are 50% positive with only 14 reviews, which is unfair because inherently there are two ways you should game and could game a game review on Steam. The first way that you should do is you should have all your friends and family buy the game, give them cash for it, and then play it for a while and then put a review there. Doesn't even have to be an honest review, but just getting reviews that are good early on will make your game stand out and more than likely get it promoted a little bit. This is very much like the argument for buying subscribers on YouTube, which, as far as I can tell, only might work for a brief moment, and very well you would get caught and get your channel deleted, so it's very risky to do it. But yeah, getting 15 reviews even from friends and family will make your game stand out very well, and it would balance out another 15 people who would potentially review your game negatively. Now, the way you shouldn't do this, which is the other way, would be to get your friends and family to go to your competitor's website game and buy the game and review it very negatively. Both of those type of tactics are applied in huge amounts of astroturfing campaigns for product listings on Amazon.com and Walmart, I'm sure also, and just, I imagine, all over the internet. Unfortunately, we don't have a device that can determine if someone is telling the truth or not, the lie detector being something that doesn't actually work. It would be interesting if we had a lie detector check, as far as you have to plug in this device and it has to verify that what you're saying and typing right now is true. Of course, you can't even get humans to agree on what truth means, or if there is objective truth, or what the objective truth might be. Certainly would be interesting though if that was the case, if there was some kind of thing you could stick your finger in and it could read your blood pressure and say, hey, you cannot post when your blood pressure is too high. Even if it was something simple like that, that would stop a lot of rage posting, I would guess. Yep, we talked about Wizards of the Coast and Giant Skull announcing a Dungeons & Dragons action-adventure game for consoles and PC. I did rewrite my text rewriter extension, reprogram it to rewrite when it's going to list all the consoles versus modern consoles. So hopefully that will save me some reading in the long run. It does feel like things are warming up. As far as we're just getting more announcements and more games happening. And maybe I'm even getting more subscribers and more views on YouTube at the moment because things are just starting to get back into a pattern. But yeah, we're still seeing a lot of garbage games coming out on Steam, which weirdly I guess that is the normal pattern. Moving on, Yakuza 0's Director's Cut Overview 188 Yakuza 0 trailer is available on Gematsu if you want to check that out. Yeah. But yeah, it definitely is crazy that you get these games that are just like negatively reviewed immediately. There definitely, I think, is a case where some game developers just don't test their games, or maybe they are only testing their games on friends and family who are telling them only positive things. Which, yeah, as a video game critic, if I was going to test somebody's game, I'd probably be pretty cruel and truthful about it. I just don't have it into me to have tact or to hold my tongue. But yeah, I try to make it as kind and as productive feedback. But then there is also a lot of people who just don't want any negativity. Either tell me I'm perfect or don't say anything at all, which that attitude I think leads to, if not the downfall of society in total, it certainly leads to the downfall of individuals quite a bit. And game developers, I think in particular, may fall into that mistake more often than most, as a small independent game developer can basically work on the projects in isolation and not have to work with others. Moving on, Nitrogen Omega launches in early access on June 17th. Yeah, it seems weird. Like, why are we back at the Steam Deck tab now? Why were there two tabs? It doesn't make any sense. I didn't run the macros twice, and I'm expecting to see these games have Steam pages, and they're not opening Steam pages. Well, I've already changed how the macros run for the next run, so I can't really change anymore. I want to do one change and then make sure that one change works. It does seem like there might be a bug or just some weirdness that happens. Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour Overview trailer is available if you want to check that out on Gematsu. I don't think it's really worth looking at, and it is still pushing the Welcome Tour, which costs $10 and should definitely have been free. Nintendo has gone from, turns out it was Reggie Fils-Aimé who convinced Nintendo of Japan to include Wii Sports in the Wii, and made the Wii hugely successful. Although if Nintendo had been losing money on the bundling of Wii Sports and the selling of a Wii unit per unit, if they were losing money, then that would have been a huge mistake, because a significant number of people who bought Wiis really only did Wii Sports and Wii Bowling, and maybe bought one more game when they needed. Nowadays, to break even, you're expecting people to buy at least 3 games to make up for the losses of the hardware, if you're actually losing money on the hardware at all. Who knows at this point? They probably still are. But yeah, it's really not the practicality or the accounting of the situation that matters. It's how it feels to the consumer. And it definitely feels like Nintendo's gotten a lot more greedy by going from the Wii coming with Wii Sports to the intro demo software of the Switch 2 costing $10. Although in the middle there, between the Wii, I don't believe Wii U came bundled with any game. I don't believe the Switch 1 came bundled with any game. So this has been an established attitude for a while. Moving on, Republic of Pirates is coming to the PS5 and Xbox Series in the late 2025. It's currently available for PC, and it did have a Steam link. And I can go ahead and just move this over to my wish list since it's mostly positive. Although, when I now know that Runaway, a road adventure, was rated 75% positive with 600 reviews, something that's 73% positive with 300 user reviews, hurts me deeply, as I now suspect that there is a decent chance games like this that are making it to the wish list are going to be things that are absolute garbage. But I don't know. There is also probably a difference between something getting 300 reviews and being 75% positive. Yeah, I'm not going to make a short on this game. In 2025 versus something that did that in 2002. There's a big difference there, I would suspect. There's also a difference between a game that costs like $20 and a game that costs 74 cents. Let's see, Gamatsu says Tango Gameworks has opened its office again, now recruiting staff for an unannounced action game. I don't know how many people from Tango Gameworks actually are the same people from the old Tango Gameworks. It might be one or two people. Everybody's been laid off for a while now. August. August 2024 was when Krafton acquired them. But Microsoft shut them down. Yeah. I was thinking about Microsoft. This looks interesting. I have way too many card games on my fall list and wish list though. I'm almost certainly never gonna play another card game, CCG like game like this, but I'm not just gonna eliminate them on that probability. Anyways, I was wondering, certainly as far as just what was the totality of the damage that Sea of Thieves did to Microsoft, that they are just not capable of really admitting to. This looks too ugly to make a short on it. But yeah, I heavily suspect that the massive delays, the massive amount of investment in Sea of Thieves, which I believe is the Microsoft one, pirate game, really sucked out a lot of research and development funds that should have been in the hands of some of their other departments making other games instead. Even in this case, ZeniMax making Starfield, which, yeah, Starfield didn't knock people's socks off for sure. Moving on, I might as well also mention the Ubisoft pirate game, which I think is Skull and Bones, also didn't knock people's socks off. So if anything, it feels like Ubisoft may have ultimately, intentionally or otherwise, trolled Microsoft into convincing them to spend a lot of money developing a game to compete with Ubisoft's Skull and Bones game, and neither one of them were released in a timely enough manner for them to be successful. Anyways, now moving on. Inazuma 11 Victory Road's selectable characters trailer. Here we can see 15 selectable characters, all very anime and very different standing out, and this is perhaps one of the best examples I've ever seen of the different colored hairs and the different haircut, and where all of that came from is that you have this group of kids all wearing similar school outfits, although weirdly this one isn't wearing the blazer and is instead wearing a sweater, and some of them maybe not wearing a tie and are the bad boys, and yeah, the girls are wearing most of the girls are wearing skirts, although I wouldn't be surprised if some of these ones wearing pants are also girls. But yeah, different shapes of faces, different hairstyles, just so you can tell the different characters apart. How long would this trailer be? 4 minutes? I could almost run and go to the bathroom while watching this, so I think that's what I'm gonna do. I'm not gonna pause the recording, I'm just gonna mute my mic. Okay, I'm back. So it occurred to me as I was wandering off that you can't hear any of this trailer, and definitely I would never have a consistent source of these kinds of trailers to show in like a break. I have thought in the past of trying to figure out a way to get a whole bunch of trailers and have them play whenever I take a break, but I haven't made any insightful revelations there yet. But yeah, I could have unmuted the source, but then if I unmuted the source, which would be kind of hard for me to do, then there very well is a legitimate copyright claim, even though this is advertisement material and shouldn't be copyrightable. So yeah, I don't think I'll be doing that again. Not until I can think of something better. I only caught some of this, but it was all in Japanese, and that you were just hearing the different voice actors. I saw this character was part of the Go Home Club, which is a joke club in that schools require their students, often, at least in anime they do, to join clubs and do extracurricular activities. The Go Home Club basically is a club that often is made up of people who don't want to do any extracurricular activities and just want to go home. Although in Japan, I don't know if I really would want to go home. But maybe they don't actually go home anyways. Just because Japanese homes tend to be small and cramped. But then also it is very common, I think I've seen this in the real world and not just anime, for teachers to kind of patrol the arcades and the malls and the shopping districts of schools and yell at and or even punish students who are out and about and not at home studying or in a club activity. Japanese people very controlling and dominating amongst each other. As for Inazuma 11 Victory Road, it's a soccer game, RPG first and foremost, and it's been advertising itself for probably at least a year now, taking its time. It's based off of a fairly popular anime, but again, it's been a year, so I'm not even sure it's still on the air. It's probably based off of a popular manga also that came first. So this could be a big successful game when it finally does release, but there is a pretty high occurrence of anime games being under successful, in my opinion, for a variety of reasons. Moving on, Fantasy Life I, The Girl Who Steals Time, sales have topped 800,000, which shows another game that topped 800,000 out over the course of like 10 years, which just was like a terribly low amount of money. So this game definitely advertised itself to these sales numbers, and definitely I think deserves those sales just based on its advertising. These screenshots here don't really intrigue me much, but I can't argue with 92% positivity. Clearly the audience who wants this type of game likes this type of game. Maybe level 5 just put a level of polish there. Seems like they're giving away some kind of code. Is there any kind of in-app purchases in this game? It doesn't seem like it, and it doesn't seem like it's going in that way. Although weirdly it does have kernel anti-cheat and online gameplay, so I really don't know what this game is all about. Yeah, just never really caught my attention with the visuals, with that art style. I don't even know what you really call that. It almost feels a little bit claymation. It kind of looks like a Mii from the Nintendo Wii. Just giant heads and super thin legs and kind of simplistic in the features. I guess you might call it chibi, but I don't think chibi is anywhere close to the right way to describe it. I also should point out here, this is where games on my wish list are going to end up. They're going to end up checked on the wish list and have a checkbox on them for when I last looked at them, and that is going to give me an extra bit of vital information to say, hey, you have looked at this game last, or maybe first, in 10 years ago, and you still haven't decided to buy the game, so maybe it's not particularly that important to ever buy the game at that point. And I'm unlikely to actually use that as a factor in making decisions at the moment, but I might in the future. Really, it's going to heavily depend on just how much longer I suspect to live. Which I say that kind of jokingly. I have no clue as far as how long I'll live, as much most people do. Although I did see an interesting Reddit post where someone had cancer and been given, you know, your standard 6 months to a year to live when you have stage 4 cancer or terminal cancer, something like that. Which, yeah, at a certain point, once medical science says they can't do anything for you and gives up on you, you will die, just for basic reasons. As far as they'll encourage you to give up, and they'll start withholding treatment that they would give to any other healthy person. Moving on, the Shooters Fest 2025 schedule has been announced. A weekend of shoot 'em ups. One of the categories of games I am least interested in, but you can certainly see that there's quite a few games here that they are able to promote, so it clearly is a genre that people are interested in. This looks like nothing. So I talked about details of this and new details of this announcement probably a month or two ago, and it never got reported, and I questioned frankly if it was just a rumor or if it was just a case that Shift Up's other games other than Stellar Blade are just not going to be talked about. But apparently maybe an official press release has finally come out, and perhaps I am confusing the announcements here, because it definitely seemed like there was an announcement to take their first game, Destiny Child, and relaunch that under a license in a new company. The headline here, I guess, is completely different news, and this would be something I only saw like yesterday, so this would be right on time, is that Shift Up's Project Witches, which is I guess a game they had in development, has now been called Project Spirits, and it is now recruiting developmental staff, which they made a ton of money around Stellar Blade, so they are now going to probably spend a ton of money to scale up developmental staff. One of the problems with Destiny Child certainly was that it had only, it seems like, 1 or 2 artists, and it probably needed 3 or 4 character artists and a few more programmers and everything to just maintain pace. Of course, Destiny Child was just a mobile game, a lewd mobile game, with visual styles very much like this, although neither of these characters are recognizable, and often it had kind of this yellow color palette in it too. You can see there's a lot of gold on this sword and yellow here, and this certainly is a great example of the lewd and sometimes nude imagery that was in Destiny Child, which drew my attention, as you had these anime waifus. And it's also a great example of how skin tight you can make an outfit when animating it, so they effectively are looking like they are almost naked. Let's see, do we have any more details here? Title that embraces the theme of Eastern fantasy, with a global release planned for 2027. Destiny Child had a Korean version, because they're a Korean company first, then it had later a Japanese version, which the way those games played were very different, and then it had a global version that came out a few years later, and that played very differently also. So them going with a global release is a more modern take on it. So I kind of think these might be Ghost Hunter characters that we're gonna see. Yeah. And yeah, you can definitely see the bright and colorful cheeriness here. Seems like it might even be set in a feudal era of an Asian country, although this girl clearly has modern glasses and this bikini seems to be fairly modern. This dress not so much. This girl also has a sword. And this is being made by Shift Up Studio Spirits, which might very well be a separate studio. Looks like there's a vending machine back here too, although that may not be what that is. Yeah, I don't think it is. I think this might be something that would be at a temple where you would hang your prayers. I don't know what it's called. So, yeah. From this teaser art, which really is taking the phrase teaser art to an extreme, you definitely aren't getting a full timeline on it. So those are going to be your two main characters you look at. They may not be the actual protagonist. There may be an unseen male protagonist in the game that you actually play as. That was kind of how Destiny Child worked, which is still crazy to call the game Destiny Child, but that's what it was called, having nothing to do with the music group. In Destiny Child, there were three main characters, Mona, Lisa, and Davy, which a lot of people, including myself, didn't ever figure out until it was way too late that it was the Mona Lisa and Da Vinci. They were named after those things. And yeah, three main assistants was perhaps too many in the game, particularly since Davy was basically a kid, although she was a child succubus who potentially could have been thousands of years old for all we knew. Didn't really matter. So it seems like they're probably going to scale it back down to just two main assistants. And I wouldn't be surprised if the gameplay is a lot like Destiny Child, and that you're going to find spirits, you're going to defeat them, and then you're going to collect them in a gacha game. Eastern fantasy is going to paint them into a certain corner, but it's not going to be too different from Destiny Child. Now, I'm talking about this game probably way too much, but if there's one company I'd like to see succeed more, it is Shift Up. If they have to single-handedly bring lewd back into being mainstream and acceptable, so be it. It'll be interesting, certainly, to see how many people are willing to take their experience with Stellar Blade, which has more realistic graphics, and transfer their fandom from Stellar Blade, which I'm not sure there really is a rabid fan base from Stellar Blade, to this next game, which I assume is a mobile game. No, they're saying it's a cross-platform game. It would be certainly interesting to see if there was any big jump in Nikkei players. That's their second game, Nikkei Goddess of Victory, which has similar art styles to this, but not quite exactly the same. That Nikkei Goddess of Victory is a sci-fi shooter game with a lot of lewd poses and animations too. So there's one consistency amongst all their games, is that the way the characters are drawn is lewd, even if the characters themselves aren't even really particularly aggressive in their sexual advances. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if this is a mobile game first that is cross-platform. I wouldn't be surprised if very few people who came into Stellar Blade likes this art style. Almost certainly this art style is easier and cheaper to make than the Stellar Blade art style is. And yeah, this definitely is an art style that fans of Shift Up from day one will appreciate, and I believe that the people in charge of Shift Up will appreciate. And if the rumors are true that those people are now rich, they can just do whatever they want, and I hope they are successful in doing whatever they want. I'm willing to go along with the journey. That is more than enough time looking at that image. And I swear, if YouTube just tries to strike me on this, I'm going to throw a fit. I don't know what else I could do with it, but I would definitely throw a fit. Let's see, Brave X Junction demo is now available. Try out Rydo Japan's Blackjack RPG. Which, yeah, okay. Is that what this is? Yeah. So it looks like it's a Blackjack RPG game, which isn't a terrible thought, with dungeon crawling elements and anime girls in bikini armor. Might be something there. Again, I'm not sure that I could really cover something like that. Yeah, just to maintain YouTube family friendliness over the longer period of time. Of course, that would keep my attention a lot more than a Blackjack RPG game that just looked like Elder Scrolls or Skyrim. Moving on, this week's Japanese game releases: the Switch 2, Mario Kart, Bravely Default, Flying Fairy HD Remaster, Yakuza 0 Director's Cut, and more. Let's see. So in Japan, the Switch 2 is technically out, although I heard from DF Retro that it was kind of hard to see any real availability, that it's hard to get it even in Japan. And the guy who happened to be in Japan, if he was to get the international version, which seems to be very hard to get in Japan, he would struggle then to get it back to his home base in Germany, and if he got the Japanese version, it would just be basically useless to him, the region lock version. So it'll be probably a week or longer before we see the first week of sales of the Switch 2, which I think there's almost certainly a argument that where they're going to say they were sold out for the first week, because I would suspect there just aren't going to be that many units available. It would be a huge smack in the face of Nintendo if in their home country of Japan the Switch 2 did not sell out in the first week. Deltarune is also being released, I think, for the Switch. But yeah, this game's not out yet here on Steam. I'm trying to figure out why it doesn't have any reviews, but it's not out yet, so that explains that. Capture Nexus doesn't seem like anything. That's nothing. People Can Fly cancels the Square Enix published Project Gemini VR game Project Bifrost. As a result, we have to significantly regroup as a studio and scale down our teams. So there is an actual quote here that they are actually going to lay off people. Famitsu just doing their headlines so much better than Video Games Chronicles, making it so much easier to go through these stories. Paradise Beach Simulator. No, I don't think there's anything there. The World Ends With You director Tatsuya Kondo has left Square Enix after 29 years. Quote, "I will continue doing my best going forward," end quote. Kind of a very Japanese thing to say. no surprise really there. Square Enix is shedding all of its talent. It's just running itself into the ground. I never got to play The World Within Ends With You as a game. It always caught my attention when it was first announced many years ago, and then when it was re-released it caught my attention again. But I never really expected that there would be a sequel to it, or that, frankly, after the second release, that I'd ever get around to it. Maybe one day I'll get around to it. If only I had infinite time and infinite energy and infinite money, then everything would be perfect. Now this is interesting, not in that the game is interesting, but one of these screenshots I do believe was on a Steam Deck, yes. Which is an interesting way to take a screenshot of your game. I wonder if more people are going to try that. I feel like at a certain point Steam should probably step in and say, hey, even if you're promoting our own hardware, which I bet this isn't even Steam Deck verified. Nope, it says Steam Deck compatibility unknown. Even if you're promoting our own hardware, they probably should say you must include screenshots that are direct capture screenshots and not photos of your game playing on a certain device. If it was anything other than the Steam Deck, that would be a pretty big problem if all of a sudden you saw a Nintendo Switch playing the game as a screenshot on a Steam listing. Let's see, Sega Football Champions 2025 has been announced for the PS4 and 5, the PC, iOS, and Android, which that's a mouthful, but I don't see how you would convert that down into a shorter sentence. Which, okay, we'll leave it at that. It is interesting how this game is cross-platform, supporting both ugly graphics on PC from what the screenshots look like, and probably the maximum level of quality graphics you could do on iOS and Android. Do I want to give this game a chance? Yeah, I will, just because I don't want to make a decision. There's a massive amount of games on the follow list that are also prologues, and I'm not being particularly gentle in making sure that something labeled a prologue is actually a demo / prologue to a game and isn't actually important information and gameplay that should be played before playing the main game. So far I have not found any game prologues actually necessary to play, but there might be one or two that would help. Apparently PopUcom X Rabbids collaboration has been announced. I don't know who PopUcom is though. It's a cooperative puzzle adventure game. Let's see what that looks like. This is a minute and 19 seconds, so if we jump 20 seconds in, the rabbits are yelling and being ridiculous. So the actual game here seems like it's a co-op game with several mini games, and the collab seems to be that you just are wearing rabbits' helmets, which isn't really a terrible way to do a collab. I don't think I'd really play PopUcom just because of the Rabbids crossover, but I might play it just as a interesting looking puzzle game. Of course, the problem here is that it has co-op only gameplay, which tells me I will never likely play it. It certainly would be revolutionary if I could find somebody who wanted to play with me and make content that I actually trusted and wanted to do that with, but I definitely am not expecting it to happen. Let's see, that one was already checked, so there was no reason to make another YouTube short around it. Stellar Blade's demo for PC is now available. According to Steam. Which, yeah. I still really should play the other game before I play Stellar Blade. Although I'm kind of in a great place where I could play Stellar Blade first and then play Nier Automata. And that way, be playing the better game second. Devolver Digital and Kenny Sun announced a game called Ball X Pit. Ball versus Pit or Ball Cross Pit. Let's see. There's actually a lack of Zelda top-down looking games like this that are on my follow list. And just they say this is an idle RPG, and yeah, it is an idle game, which loses 100% of my interest immediately. Yeah, weirdly, top-down adventure games get lost, if they even exist on Steam, amongst the thousands upon thousands of RPG Maker games, and it's just almost impossible to tell the difference. The only thing I guess a game could do is just have a lot of screenshots of dungeons and top-down dungeons like you see in games like Link's Awakening. And I haven't seen anything like that so far. So at a certain point, I probably should start asking people for suggestions of certain games if they even exist, but if I haven't seen it, the odds of someone else having seen it is pretty low. Elden Ring Night Rain shipments and digital sales have topped 2 million in one day. Which, yes, the excitement around that was very high. And now it is rated 73% positive. Felt like when it first came out it was a little less positive when it first came out, but I guess maybe people are happy now. Death Stranding 2 on the Beach game premiere event is set for June 8th. This is a great example of a game that probably should not be allowed on Steam. Yeah, I guess there is a bit of new information now, knowing how many games do get removed from Steam, in that there probably is some kind of system on Steam with Steam Direct, where a lot of games are getting looked at by people that actually work at Valve and removed for one reason or another. It just seems like it is taking way longer and happening in the public view way too often. Yeah, because there definitely are some games that should have never been listed in the first place. I think maybe Valve could at least put out some guidance and say, hey, here's what games look like that are going to fail on our channel or on our storefront, and here's what games look like that are going to succeed. So make your games look this way, and if you can't make them look this way, don't bother. Moving on, Wuthering Waves version 2.4 update, Lightly We Toss the Crown, launches June 12th. This might actually be something we had already looked at too. Among Ashes coming to the Xbox Series on June 6th. So, Komatsu articles also were not caught up? I question that. This is just a demo. Tamagotchi Plaza basic gameplay trailer. That is June 1st. That would have just been right as I was wrapping up Friday's stream. So yeah, maybe I did just open everything really fast on Friday to avoid starting so incredibly late, which is exactly where we are today. This is another late night stream, which I think ironically is going to end up with me getting more views. Trinity Trigger is now available for iOS and Android. We may not have too many new games to look at the end of this stream, since we're integrating it. They're all mixed in with the news articles, which I'd almost think that's preferable, but I really don't think it is. I think there's plenty of people who would be uninterested in looking at all the new games on Steam, where there's a lot more people who would be interested in the news. Like, theoretically, if I took these live streams and just took a editor's hatchet to it, I would cut out the first hour of warm-up always, and I would cut out the last hour or so of looking at new games on Steam if I wanted just the news section, the best section, in my opinion. Yeah, I think we've already covered all these stories, so I'm not even gonna really mention them. Save my breath a little bit. Now, the one problem with the way my macros are working right now is that they definitely are just opening everything in the same window, so duplicate tabs aplenty are going to be open. Although one of my macros actually does work, so I could turn all of the tabs into the list that is used for making YouTube shorts pretty consistently and pretty quickly. This is a demo. So let's go to the store page and check that. Or not check that and let my macro check it. I definitely also need to rethink just how many of these horror games I really want to play. I am thinking maybe the next game I should play should be some kind of horror game. It's been a long time since I've played one. Yeah, I really just don't know how many I really have and how many I really want to play. Yeah. Anything that's early access will stay checked, and so if there's a game that was made in like 2020 and it's still in early access but I'm actually interested in it, I'll just keep it checked forever. But because it's checked, if it ever comes out of early access, I won't get the notification unless it actually was on the follow list instead of just being checked. So there is a real argument to putting early access games I'm actually interested in on the follow list and building the follow list up again to massively large numbers. There is definitely a danger here. I'm going to go and look at my wish list and find that there's so many games on that now that it doesn't open. I don't think that'll be a problem, but it might be, because I think the wish list just works in a different way and is perhaps programmed a little bit better as far as a web page than the follow list is. This was the whole Adam Fault story that I was thinking of a completely different game I'm talking about. And this is last week's sales numbers. So that was quite the catch up. Moving on to gaming on Linux. well, almost moving on to gaming on Linux. A freaky incremental dungeon crawler called Horror Plant gets a demo, which apparently I've already made a YouTube short around that. The Chilled Factory Builder Shapes 2 gets a massive upgrade. Okay. XWVM is a modern Unity engine that plays Star Wars X-Wing First Alpha, now out. Interesting. I don't know if that's specifically something though that would make it easier to play on Linux, or if it's just making it easier to play it on Windows. And they're linking the Star Wars X-Wing Special Edition, which is, according to this, released in 1994. Pretty old game that seems to still have a rabid fan base. A Rock Crusher is an incremental clicker with a huge transformational skill tree. I guess Rock Crusher is the name of it, but weirdly don't have a Steam link for it. The point-and-click adventure The Mystery of Doomsday Valley has been confirmed for Linux, which again, at this point, a point-and-click adventure game is about the last thing I want to hear a new announcement from. But this is kind of a great example. This is scheduled for the very end of 2026, quarter 4, and it is still using flat 2D animation, which is really the only way you can budget to make a point-and-click adventure game and try and make a profit there. You cannot go 3D CGI. And this also is a game that is only promising 4 to 6 hours of gameplay and is kickstarting, so there's very much a niche audience you have to lean heavily on to make a point and click and get it to be even have a chance of having success. So far of the animations they're showing, it looks decent enough. So like games like this too, where they probably aren't anything I'd want to play. They might even feel a little bit like an NES or Super NES game. Like games that feel like that too on Steam on the follow list, and I'm really having to question if I'd ever actually want to play them. An ace shooter called Celico gets improved performance in a spiced up randomizer mode. Some of these have Steam links that are getting opened, but I question if all of them are. And this is another great example. Something came out in March of or May of 2024, and yet it's still labeled as early access, and yet it did get a new update. And I think at a certain point, what would be just described as just updates to a game are now being described as early access updates to convince people the game is never going to be abandoned, when we know for a fact it is. My personal Facebook suggested me a couple of follower groups that you can follow that show advertising material for video games, and one of the ads was for a old, I would say 90s era pinball game with a cyberpunk lady on the table as far as artwork goes, and I'm gonna have to do like a reverse image search to see what the name of that game is. Maybe it was called Virtual Fantasy. But yeah, it certainly looked a lot better than this pinball game. Let's see. Stellar Blade works well on Linux, SteamOS, and the Steam Deck, which is intriguing, certainly. I was listening to a YouTuber and they were questioning why handhelds are still getting made and released that have Intel CPUs and NVIDIA graphics cards. Well, inherently, NVIDIA has terrified its partners. So if you are partnering with NVIDIA to sell anything, they are under threat of excommunication, basically, if they are going to make a product that used AMD graphics cards instead. And with that, if you are under threat that you would never get NVIDIA graphics cards, graphics chips again, if you made a handheld that used an AMD graphics card, then there's really no reason why you would have an AMD CPU in a handheld either. It makes a little bit more sense to have an ARM chip in your handheld at that point. So what we're inherently going to see, I think, is companies that don't have to deal with NVIDIA pop up making AMD graphics cards handhelds and AMD CPU handhelds. And then anyone who has an NVIDIA partnership in anything, if they make NVIDIA laptops or desktops or something like that, will probably just pull out of the handheld market completely. So with the exception of like Valve, which has enough money that they can not really be threatened by NVIDIA, you're going to see no real recognizable names, for the most part, releasing handhelds. Of course, that doesn't explain the Lenovo Legion Go S at all, so my speculation here is probably not 100% accurate, but I definitely think it's part of the problem. I'm not technically right, but I'm evoking the feeling of rightness, which some might say talking out of my butt. Dr. Life Simulator. Now, I wouldn't be opposed to a simulator game where you play as a doctor or a nurse or something. I don't know how much of that experience is really replicatable or even interesting. The reality is, in the United States, a lot of doctors are probably doing a lot of paperwork and just on the phone arguing with insurance companies, and not doing particularly anything too interesting. Doctors versus surgeons. Now, surgeons might spend most of their time doing surgery. Doctors are going to spend most of their time talking to people, and at a certain point you might have a decent game there where you have to listen and pay attention to the symptoms of a character as they're told to you, and then you have to do some detective work to figure out and diagnose what their condition is and figure out the right treatment. It almost feels like that would be more of a card game or tabletop game than a video game, but video game might make it simpler and easier to go along with that. But yeah, very few doctor houses out there. And the one good surgeon game that I've ever played involves magical diseases and magical motions to slow down time. For the Wii U, no, not the Wii U, but the Wii, I think, is Trauma Surgeon. Yeah, I think it was called Trauma Surgeon. That's a pretty old game. They made a couple of them, and then I guess they ran out of steam. I think it was for the Nintendo DS originally, come to think of it. Let's see, moving on. G Proton 10-4 brings updates for Wine Wayland, AMD FSR4, more game fixes. Yeah, on that same podcast I was listening to, there's a lot of complaining, certainly, that there's no consistency and no connecting API between upscaling technologies, where AMD has their proprietary FSR4, I assume it's proprietary, NVIDIA has its DLSS which is definitely proprietary. And I imagine there are some more software ones, so there's really no consistency and nobody's working together to make one better than the other. Just be the standard. Proton is the community-based version of Proton. So it would be kind of weird if you were running it on SteamOS. It's more likely you'd run it on Chimera or what is the other one called? The more popular one than Chimera. Bazzite Linux, that's the name of it. It's still a shame, in my opinion, though, that people are even caring about upscaling technology and even trying to do anything with upscaling technology, particularly on a Steam Deck. It'd be a rare occasion in which you really would benefit from upscaling if you're looking at the Steam Deck screen. Like, I don't think a game that, well, I mean, it might get you 5 to 10 more frames, it might get you frame consistency, so it's going to be very specific to your specific situation, what specific game you're playing. Wine 10.9 brings EGL support for all graphics drivers and updated VK Direct 3D. I don't know what EGL is. Let's see. Well, these are all technical words and it's going over my head. I don't know what EGL is. I think maybe it's extended graphics language, if I was just to pick 3 words, but I needed a little bit more details here. Whatever Wine is updating here as far as their things will be integrated into Proton more than likely, so we'll see a Proton new version fairly quickly. Definitely don't want any jump scare horror garbage games. I also don't want any Find the Anomaly or Find the Difference style games in my wish list either. Those are just not games I want to play. Gaming on Linux says the loser Linux well, there's a slip of a tongue. The Linux user shares has hit a multi-year high on Steam for May 2025. Linux user share for Steam has been slowly but steadily trending upwards, with May showing its highest point in years, at least since 2018. This is the highest it's been in a long time. When you take into account how Steam is always growing, it shows that the amount of Linux users on Steam continues to grow nicely too. So Linux is at 2.69% of people running the Steam client. They're running Linux, or their operating system reports itself as Linux, which is above macOS at 1.85%, but still both are trailing mightily behind Windows, which is 95.45%. And I don't imagine that there's a significant number of people running Linux or macOS and it's just reporting as Windows. But yeah, you can see how the Linux user share was actually kind of staying stable, if not trending downward. And then the Steam Deck was released in 2022, and it took it a while to actually encourage people to actually receive their Steam Decks and play them. And you get a little bit of a bump here, which is trending upwards from where it was, but it's not getting over the average. And then you get a big shoot down where people couldn't get the Steam Deck. There was a bit of a shortage, or they just weren't interested in it. And then once the Steam Deck came back, you get a big shoot up and then a almost straight line shoot down here. And it almost feels like they had the Steam Deck ready to go at the second it hit a certain point. So they announced the OLED. Although maybe they announced the OLED here and that's why you get to shoot down, as people just stopped buying the LCD version. Since the OLED is released, it is above average for most of the time, coming up in peaks and valleys. Although fairly recently you have a pretty good valley as people start to think about the Switch 2. But then right now, we definitely have a peak. A lot of this almost certainly would have to do with what the new game was at the same time. So I'd really love to be able to take a chart like this and overlay what was the #1 new game in each of these months. Because if there was something like Marvel Rivals and that couldn't be played on the Steam Deck, you might get the valley because of that. Or if there was a new game that totally could be played on the Steam Deck like Baleotro, you might get a peak like that. I'm not sure Marvel Rivals actually is not playable on the Steam Deck though. The percentage of people actually using SteamOS actually went down by 2.83%. So the ending of Windows 10 has pushed a lot of people to move to other forms of Linux, like Linux Mint, instead, because they probably have desktops and they're afraid of experimenting a little too much by installing a SteamOS recovery image on a desktop PC that may not really have the hardware that's compatible with it. One likely reason is how simplified Chinese as a language option on Steam went down for May, which does usually bring the Linux numbers up too. Linux with Steam in that region just isn't particularly popular. Let's move on. Yeah. I really don't know if we've got another 20 minutes or another hour of news. Probably not too much longer, I would bet. May be surprised very quickly and be at the end. The Humble Bundle has launched their 2025 Pride Month Games Bundle. Okay. If you're interested, I guess check out the Humble Bundle. There are several games here. You might want to double check and see where the money is going as far as which charity. There is quite a lot of LGBT games, which is really to say there's quite a lot of visual novels with lesbians and gay males. There's very few games that I've seen that have a significant amount of bisexuals as a focus. Maybe you'll get one character that claims to be bisexual in a romance visual novel, and I don't know if I've seen more than even one, and I may not have even seen one transgender game. That being said, I'm excluding futanari games, adult sex games where you have a dick girl. I don't think I would really call them transgender unless the character specifically said, yes, I feel like a man even though I was born a woman. So yeah, in the same way, I wouldn't really consider a Japanese character in a visual novel who refers to themselves as a male, says something like Bokawa, the male version of I, but then dresses effeminately. I would just think that that's probably a cross-dresser or drag queen equivalent. If a Japanese character in their original dialogue said Watashi, the female version of I, as I understand it, then I would assume that they were transgender. But yeah, I can't name anything like that. and the QIA plus elements are harder to peg down in my mind as far as any games like that. Let's see. There are way too many games, though, that are tagged as being LGBTQ on Steam, and then really have very little of that, if that is the focus that the player is looking for. See, I feel like this echoes of Plum Grove. May very well be one of those games, because this says it came out August 29th, 2024, so why would it be open if it wasn't the first Steam link on that list of Humble Bundle games? I saw a meme where the corporate calendar is shown, and it is 11 months with the thin blue line, all Cops Lives Matter flag, and then in May or April or June, I guess we're in June, there is a flag of the Pride flag, which, yeah, that's a pretty good damning visual statement, in that corporations are 100% going to support cops who are actively created to protect rich people's interests and maintain the system of capitalism that exists in the United States. And then they're going to act basically on a pretense and just tokenly, if that's a word, tokenism, to pretend like they care about LGBTQ people in June. Although a lot of game companies do kind of seem like they care about it year round. A lot of them definitely don't, and don't act like they do. Well, let's see. Moving on, Gaming on Linux has the most played Steam Deck games from May. Alright. So it is a list. Let's see, as I scroll down this list quickly, if anything surprises me. No, I don't think so. Schedule 1 and Blueprints, both as games, have surprised me in the last month since they've come out, but not specifically because they're on the Steam Deck. Something like NBA 2K25 being on the Steam Deck is a little surprising to me, in that I just wouldn't think those types of players would be playing on the Steam Deck, but who knows. People are still playing GTA 5 Enhanced, even though it's labeled as not even being compatible, which I can't help but wonder if some of these games are hidden from the list when they are completely incompatible and still somehow being played on the Steam Deck, which also highlights how their compatibility ratings are not particularly consistent. Precinct, just as its theme, surprises me that it's caught people's attention. Yep. Game Grumps are playing Balertro, and yeah, at some point, if I could get a decent sale on this, get it down to $10, I might grab it and play it. I don't think Game Grumps is really going to spoil anybody's experience with Balertro, though, because I think it's probably a little too randomized of a game. Alright, and so that will bring us to GameDeveloper.com articles, if we have any. We will just have to see. And it doesn't seem like we do. And then that would bring me to this interstitial that says all the new games on Steam, but there are no games on Steam, and there is no flawless cleanup, which then brings me to the next tab, which would be project news from Bazlight, which I haven't put any new project news out recently. I don't think that means really, I think we're done. Like, there's a ton of other tabs that are asleep, but these are all games that I looked at in previous streams and was going to make YouTube shorts around. So I'm just going to double check and scroll to the very end of an extremely long list of tabs on my Firefox window just to see that these are 100% Steam games, that there was nothing else open. Now, do I think we got all the news? Yes. Do I think we got all of the games that came out on Steam? I hope so. Am I certain? No. I can say that the very last tab on this first window is a Steam link of a game I had covered before. And let's see. It doesn't seem like I have anything else open as far as any other windows. Now, obviously, the move here I would have liked is for all of that to open in its own separate window and be isolated away from the first window, but no such luck. So yeah, my macro's still broken to some extent, still needs work, and hopefully we got all the news. It seems like we got the right amount of news. It's 3 hours, which started way too late. So that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Which, by the way, I saw a survey where somebody was asking his audience if anybody had ever actually subscribed or listened to any of those key shout out engagement begs, I guess is the best word, the e-begging there. And the survey clearly said nobody had subscribed, although I do subscribe to people, and I often am reminded when somebody says it out loud. Maybe my ending that asks you to do far too many things at once is totally wrong. I know it's totally wrong. But yeah, I think saying it out loud probably is still helpful. And I only say it at the ending, so it's not too annoying. Anyways, that's going to be it for the stream. Have a good evening.